you remember the outside? Do you remember the feel of the sun on your face? Maybe a hot wind rushing against your skin? I do too. But for now, let's talk about the amazing world of chemical weapons. Why they came about, what they're for, and just the simple, awe-inspiring havoc they can wreak across a countryside. After the horrors and destruction of the First World War, every primary state on the planet knew the effects that gas and other chemical weapons could pose on their possible enemies. The nightmare of those battles around the globe persisted, but particularly in Europe, where millions would have a front row seat to the devastation that would be caused by the new weapons. In the good old U.S., the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, Peyton Conway March, established a service that was responsible for tackling the needs of the armed forces in any future wars, mostly by civilian chemists and scientists that saw their tasks grow as the interwar period went on, chemists such as Vannevar Bush and several other prominent figures in their respective fields. These chemists had little regard for the implementations of their discoveries and inventions, often doing their due diligence to ensure their maximum effectiveness. The development of chemical weapons would continue from World War I through the 1930s into the Second World War, and well past following the establishment of the Chemical Warfare Service, or the CWS. The weapons and chemicals developed would become instrumental to the United States' effort to fight future conflicts and maintain foreign control. The evolution of these weapons can be traced through conflicts that the U.S. has participated in and were tailored to those specific conflicts. For the Second World War, the United States' use of chemical weapons was mostly limited to the Pacific theater of operations. The Americans employed almost all of the chemical weapons they had developed in the 1930s and into the war period. The power that these weapons would come to yield would lead to a shift in the U.S.'s approach to waging war. To really understand the importance of chemical warfare, we will need to go way back to the beginning, to the start of the chemical industry and the importance that it would play in early industrialization. We are looking at a lot of history here, so be prepared. The production of chemicals was a new and exciting industry that provided many important breakthroughs that would allow the modern world to become recognizable. Photography and vulcanized rubber, to name a few. Needless to say that the chemical industry would become extremely important to industrialization all over the world, particularly in Germany and the US. Right before the outbreak of the war, there was only one industry that the US lagged behind everyone else in the world. That would be chemical production. Hence why in the video about the submarine Deutschland, if you remember, all four of you that watched it, one of the products that Germany sent to the Americans was chemicals. You're probably thinking, there must have been rules against the use of gas as a weapon. Well, then you're correct. The Declaration of the Hague Convention of 1899 was signed by 31 states, including all major World War I combatants. Then, in 1904, Teddy Roosevelt decided that there needed to be more controls on the potential use of chemical weapons. This conference was postponed due to the war between Japan and Russia. Future video incoming. The second conference was held in 1907. This second conference had more of a focus on naval warfare, which the British attempted to limit the size of Germany's navy. For us, we are going to focus on section 4.2, Declaration concerning the prohibition of the use of projectiles with the sole object to spread asphyxiating poisonous gases. This declares, as its title suggests, that chemical weapons cannot be loaded into artillery shells and fired at an enemy. I'm very sure you can see where this is going. It doesn't take a genius to figure this one out. No gas in long-distance shells. Other delivery methods could there be? It's also important to note that the US never signed on to this section of the treaty. This may be a recurring theme on this channel. Just a feeling. The stage is set. We have treaties in place that say no country is allowed to effectively exterminate each other with chemical weapons. So technology is going nuts and every side is trying to get the flanky spanky on each other. As you can see, these static lines did not allow for such a killing blow. Though both sides would try with massive offenses that did little in the way of actually crashing through the entrenched enemy. But you're not here to learn about the strategic situation of Western Europe in 1915. Becoming impatient with the stalemate, both sides were making great leaps into research and development on all kinds of weapons, as well as sneaky ways to deploy them. Yeah, the first one wasn't so sneaky. The Germans first used gas against the Allies at the Battle of Ypres on April 22, 1915. They first used more than 150 tons of lethal chlorine gas against French colonial divisions. This was the first major gas attack by the Germans. Even though this was illegal, the Germans did it anyway. And despite what I said before, this was not actually the first gas attack. The first gas attack was performed by the Germans against the French in 1914. For this attack, they used tear gas. The second time was in 1915, early 1915, against the Russians. Oh, our old friends. The Germans fired shells loaded with Zisel bromide towards the Russian lines. In typical Russian v German fashion, the gas froze. Though the Russians did report that more than 1,000 of their troops had been killed. I'm not even shocked. That's typical Russia. Weapon freezes, it's still effective against them. The first attacks proved the effectiveness of chemical weapons, and it was all the Germans and Allies needed to build and employ more. Now, I'm sure some of you out there are thinking, the Allies used gas? Yeah, everybody did. It was tit for tat at that point. You blow my grandmother's house up, I'm going to blow your school up. It's just the way that war works. It was around this time that you start to see the classic gas masks and respirators appear. You know, the kind that makes people look like they're monsters. I want to show you a quote from livescience.com about the effects of mustard gas and why it was so terrifying, plus the reason why respirators became so important. The gas is a vesicant or blister agent causing redness and itching of the skin that results in yellow, pus-filled blisters. Because mustard gas strips away the mucous membranes of the eyes, nose, and respiratory tract, victims may also experience irritation of the eyes, temporary blindness, runny nose, cough, shortness of breath, and sinus pain. The digestive tract is also affected, resulting in abdominal pain, diarrhea, fever, and vomiting. Jesus fucking Christ. It didn't take long for everyone to realize that as deadly as chlorine, mustard, and other gases were, they could not penetrate a respirator, until someone decided to use tear gas and found out that it got through a gas mask very, very easily, and then the light bulb moment happened. Some masochistic motherfucker figured out that tear gas goes right through a respirator. I don't know if you've ever been tear gassed, but it's not a comfortable experience. Your eyes water, your nose runs, you can barely breathe. So you take off your respirator or your mask in hopes, just hoping to get some fresh air and get some feeling back in your eyes. And then you're hit with mustard gas or chlorine gas. And after I just described what mustard gas can do to you, that's not a cocktail I want to be drinking. The progress of these weapons in the First World War was horrific, and it was not lost on the individuals that were involved and the effects on those around them. Knowing the effects of these weapons, most major powers quickly put far more effort into creating chemical warfare divisions, such as the United States Chemical Warfare Service. The British were slower to create their own chemical warfare branch, though by the end of the war, a quarter of all British artillery shells were gas-filled. By 1918, Britain had produced around 25,400 tons of toxic chemicals. The French were the first to use tear gas. 26mm grenades filled with ethyl brom in August 1914. The small amount of gas that these shells could deliver made them pretty much useless, and the stocks that the French had were quickly used up. The civilian and military groups that were involved were trying to kill each other with what were effectively pesticides. It was clear to every involved party that this was never going to stop. These weapons were never going to go away. They were going to persist in one form or another. They were just too damn effective. They were cheap, they were easy, and more than that, it didn't take a very smart scientist to make them. The US, identifying this, decided that they wanted to stay out in front of the curve, and beefed up the CWS. Now I want you to understand, that does not mean that everyone that was involved in these projects was a monster or just looking to kill people. There were people who were following more noble pursuits. Hi, I want to thank you. I hope you've enjoyed part 1. In part 2, we're going to look at the interwar period. For those of you who don't know, that's the 1930s and 20s. We're going to look at that, and we're also going to look at the start of World War II. I haven't finished writing it yet, so I'm not sure where I'm going to cut it around, but I don't think it's going to include all of World War II. That's going to be its own separate video. Now, for those of you history nuts out there who might, have a surface level understanding or maybe even a little bit of a deeper understanding, might not know that there were chemical weapons employed very heavily in the Second World War. That's why we're going to learn together.